So welcome back. We are continuing with our wonderful series of looking at Ayn Rand's phenomenal characters in Atlas Shrugged. And today we'll be talking about a character that I shall not name yet until Dr. Andrew Bernstein gives a disclaimer.
Well, Atlas Shrugged is a mystery story, everybody, and you don't want the mystery spoiled, so there's going to be a lot of plot spoilers here. So read the book first, and then come watch this series. So that's the takeaway here.
Okay, so I'll start, and then I'm going to turn it over to Shoshana and then Andy. But today we are talking about continuing the talk about John Galt, and there's one quote that I love, and I'm sure we all do. Some of you will never know who is John Galt, but for those of you who have known a single moment of love for existence and of pride in being its worthy lover, a moment of looking at this earth and letting your glance be its sanction, have known the state of being a man. And I am the only man who knew that that state is not to be betrayed. I am the man who knew what made it possible and who chose consistently to practice and to be what you had practiced and had been in that one moment. So here John Galt is reaching out to all of us saying, the best moments in your life, when you felt that blessing upon yourself and the whole world, when you had self-esteem, when you were nourishing your values and embracing them and just looking at people and seeing the benevolence in them. And when you had that outlook on life, that's what I choose every day of my life with my moral code. And you can have that too. It doesn't have to be just here and there. So with that, I'm going to talk. Shoshana, you said something to me about how wouldn't it be fascinating to look at the world, to look at Atlas Shrugged through John Galt's eyes. What was he faced with? What did he need to do? And I'll read one quote and turn it over to you. Galt said he saw no way to, Francisco is saying, he went out in the world to when he inherited Danconia Coppa, and he could see so much corruption, so many of these looters and moochers that Andy reverses and calls them.
Mooches and mooters.
Yeah, I didn't get it.
It's really not that difficult.
Yeah, I know, but it takes me a lot of repetition.
It's all right. This is why we love you, Ellen.
And so Francisco said, John found the way to fight the battle. Of course, it's a moral battle. He said there were just the two of us with him, Rania and Francisco, the night when he came to New York in answer to his call, Rania and I. He told us what we had to do and what sort of men we had to reach. He had quit the 20th century, double entendre there. He was living in a garret in a slum neighborhood. He stepped to the window and pointed at the skyscrapers of the city. He said that we had to extinguish the lights of the world. And when we would see the lights of New York go out, we would know that our job was done. He did not ask us to join him at once. He told us to think it over and to weigh everything it would do to our lives. I gave him my answer on the morning of the second day, and Rania a few hours later in the afternoon. Dagny, that was the morning after our last night together. I had seen in a manner of vision that I couldn't escape what it was that I had to fight for. It was the way you looked that night, for the way you talked about your railroad, for the way you had looked when we had tried to see the skyline of New York from the top of a rock over the Hudson. I had to save you, to clear the way for you, to let you find your city. And with that, you can take us from the beginning, Shoshana, of the world through John Galt's eyes, what he faced, what he discovered, and then we'll go to.
Okay, well, first of all, I think we need to understand that that's not the novel the way that Ayn Rand wrote it, okay? Because she could have written that novel. She could have written that novel about John Galt starting out in Ohio, and then somehow he gets to Patrick Henry University, and what it was like for him to meet those two friends, and how they even met so fast, and knew each other and ended up in their classes and negotiated and so on, or even how he reached his decision, which we hear the conclusion from Jeff Allen. I'm going to, no, And he says, yeah, I pronounced that word in my mind, and then he pronounced it publicly, and his no is the strike. But how did he come to that? Was that quick? So that would be the John Galt novel in the first person, you might say. And then all the little bits that we get of him along the way when he recruited each of the people he brought with him, because you notice that we don't actually see him in those recruiting conversations. We don't see him talking to Midas Mulligan. We don't see him talking to Ken Danaker. Right, we see the result. Now, Francisco's a recruiter too, and we see that he's been working on Hank Reardon, but Galt has been a recruiter, all those people, and we don't see that, but he would have to. He would think, all right, this is a good prospect. What shall I do? How shall I talk to this person? How will the conversation go? How long will it take? And the overall plan of the Lights of New York and the skyscraper. Oh, and he meets Dagny when he's already into the strike. What difference does that make? Oh, he meets Dagny and he's putting together the things that Francisco has said about his childhood friend. Just what is it? So all these different, or his thoughts over the years about Stadler, because there was a sense in which he knows that Stadler loved him and loved him for his good qualities. And so Stadler's hating him now is also Stadler hating himself, for his own self-betrayal. So there's a whole John Galt story, including what he does, what he knows, what he thinks. And these things are not part of, they're implicit, but they're not part of the novel that Ayn Rand filled in for us. Now, it's almost as if those would even be two companion novels, the mystery novel and the mystery-less novel. The novel in which we've got the solution before we've got the crime, you might say, how he starts out on his road to be a destroyer. But that's in there in the sense that you can figure out the chronology, but you don't actually get, with very rare exception, his mind as he's thinking things through. Imagine the day that John Galt discovered Eddie Willers could be his spy. What a good day that must have been, that here's someone who's close to Dagny and who's willing to tell me everything, and all I have to do is nod and care about the railroad. And Eddie Willers doesn't even ask his name. Eddie Willers doesn't even make the connection between, oh, we really need McNamara. McNamara quit. He doesn't kind of, Eddie Willers is just slow on that. And so Galt can keep pumping him, getting information. Now we get some indications of how he thinks from some of what Eddie Willers says. You don't look very happy saying it, that sort of thing. But I think what we have all the way through is he's there, and we're getting up until where we've just met at the beginning of part 3. We're getting closer to him, but we don't actually get his thoughts. And even when we do meet him, we still don't get all of his thoughts in as much detail as we do with Dagny and Hank and some of the bad people. Now, one funny thing, of course, is that the strikers in general, we don't get their thoughts, because that's the mystery. And with Francisco, a lot of people like Francisco, but if you pay attention, you realize that you're not getting his thoughts most of the time. What you're getting is his wit and the way Dagny looks at him, the eyes of a woman in love, but you don't actually, unless he tells you.
Oh, his speech, the money speech, you get his.
Yeah, but those are different kind of thoughts. That's a performance, that's not him figuring it out. And so he's something of a performer. So I think some people say, well, we don't get Galt from the inside. Well, we don't get Francisco or the other strikers much from the inside either. However, you can still put the mystery together from backstage because you get the facts. And if you keep track of when things are happening, you say, oh, well, that's when the strike started. That's when he collected this one. That's when he collected that one. Oh, Richard Halley's not writing music anymore. How'd that happen? And Judge Narragansett quit after that case. And you realize that, right, you realize that you've seen John Galt in action just the way that you did when he came for Ken Danaker and he's out the door and we just hear the glass tinkling, that you've seen him without seeing him say, okay, I'm going to go after that one. You see the result. Now, the one case that you alluded to near the end of last time, which I think is very interesting that you can put together after you've read the whole book, is that episode of finding out about Reardon. And you're completely, correct that it's described. He says, those were my feelings, that I saw him. He had everything that should have been mine. He had Dagny, he had this career, and I saw him out of context. And then I saw the price that he was paying. Okay. Now, here's the thing. When did this happen? And he says it only bothered him. It was painful, but just for a few days. Just for a few days. All right. So let's see if we can figure out when those few days were. It's not that hard. We've already been through it. Okay. How did he find out about Hank Reardon and Dagny? From his good friend, Eddie Willers. Eddie Willers found out about it when he was helping Dagny get ready for her trip to go out, after the tunnel disaster, and to go get Quentin Daniels, who wants to quit, but said he would wait. Okay, so Eddie Willers then goes running off to tell his good friend about Quentin Daniels, whom Galt didn't know about beforehand, and who's already figured it out by him, the premise of the strike by himself without having anywhere to go. So Galt finds out about Quentin Daniels and that Dagny's on the way, and he finds out about Dagny and Hank Reardon. And at this point, if Galt were thinking in terms of Quentin Daniels and didn't know about all the things that could happen and the train and the plane and so on, he would be heading off to get Quentin Daniels right now. Okay, he should do that. Just saying. Quentin Daniels figured it out. He's a good prospect. He should be heading off to get Quentin Daniels. Instead, he hangs around to look for that meeting of great industrialists so that he can spy on Hank Reardon. Now, this is a, if this is a suspense story, he ought to be going to get Quentin Daniels to catch him. He thinks he's got enough time, but he almost misses it. He almost is just too late to get Quentin Daniels because he hung around looking for Hank Reardon. So that's sort of what Galt did. And then, okay, he sees Hank Reardon, he has his conclusions, he tells us his thoughts, and then he goes and gets Quentin Daniels, doesn't take long to persuade him, into the plane, off they go. But, just in the nick of time. So when he tells Dagny that it only hurt for a few days, well, let's see. Why would that be? Well, for one thing, of course, he's got the whole picture. On the other hand, a few days after he heard about Dagny and Hank, he's in the valley, Dagny's in the valley, and she's looking at him and he's looking at her, and they're in love. So I don't think he's, shall we say, concerned about Hank Reardon anymore. So when he says only a few days, well, there are a couple of reasons why that would be only a few days. It's not as if he then had years to wait until he and Dagny were together. In point of fact, he was pretty busy after he found that out, because he had to go get Quentin Daniels, and then Dagny lands in the valley, and there we are, you see. So it really, but he doesn't tell Dagny that. He doesn't tell Dagny, well, you see, after I heard about that, I went and got Quentin Daniels, and then you landed in the valley, everything was okay. He doesn't tell her that because he's not telling her about Eddie Willers, the spy. Okay, he's not telling her about Eddie Willers because if he goes back, he wants to keep using Eddie Willers as a spy. And he doesn't want Dagny to know how closely he's been watching her and where he's been and all of that. So I think some readers don't notice that what he hasn't told Dagny is something that we ourselves can figure out, because we know where he's been. Okay, so that's his story. And as you see, he doesn't tell Dagny the whole thing, although she could figure it out. Just as in the novel, we don't know all the incidents that happen in between. Just exactly what's Galt doing all the time in the valley. He's got classes. Okay, he's got classes teaching on physics. When is he preparing his lectures? The book doesn't have to tell us everything that he's doing, but you're a teacher. You're a teacher, you got to prepare, even if you know your subject. But that's not something, he's not nervous about it. He's explaining things that he knows, but I think it's still interesting that he doesn't have to tell us everything that he does. He doesn't have to tell us everything that he thinks. We've got the big picture of he's the man who left his motor behind and called the strike, saw Dagny, loved her, and waited and watched her. When Dagny quits herself, she knows how it felt for that boy in his 20s to leave his motor behind. Because for her there is still a kind of wrench. And I think that's interesting, that's the way we get at his feelings, again, through the eyes of the woman who loves him, and imagining how he feels. But I think the way Ayn Rand wrote the book is so much better than if we had it as,
Mystery is phenomenal. Yeah,
yeah, as if we had it from John Galt's point of view.
right. Andy, you want to jump in?
No, you're absolutely right, Shoshana. This would be a different story if we saw from if we were inside John Galt's mind. It'd be fascinating, but they could see why Ayn Rand chose what she did to have the mystery factor here. But so okay, so John Galt, as I said in an early episode, could be thought of as the man who perceives reality, no matter what. And so here he is as a young man at the 20th Century Motor Company, and he is confronted by evil. Now he knows, and one of the things he perceives here is evil. He knows it's in the world. The rest of the world are either, communist states by this time. We're very close to it, and the United States is moving in that direction. But here he is, right in his personal life, not just in the macrocosm, but in the microcosm of his life. This is pure evil. That's the Starnes heirs, that have taken over the 20th Century Motor Company, and he recognizes it's pure altruism. The able have to sacrifice themselves for the unable, and on the here and in morally it's pure altruism, but also here and on the macrocosmic, in the social world, the political world, the dominant political theme is collectivism, which is basically altruism applied to politics. That is, we have to sacrifice for others. And in politics, we have to others, on the grand scale, others means the grand scale, the state. Others come first, general altruist claim in ethics, and the state comes first as the specific collectivist claim in politics. But we have to sacrifice, and that means, the Atlases, the Galts, and those kind of people need to prop up the world. They have an unchosen duty. Yeah, they have an unchosen duty to see that. And John Galt sees it. He sees it. Well, he's Ayn Rand in this context. He's developing objectivism. He sees something here that nobody prior to Ayn Rand in the history of moral philosophy has seen. The horror, the evil of basically enslaving human beings, enslaving the innocent, and the good to others. He sees the horror of that. And he recognizes, no, each individual has the right to his or her own life. We're not a slave to the state. We're not a slave to society. We're not a slave to other people. And he sees the way out. He sees, through in his mind, through his eyes and his mind, he sees the solution. And then his what Ayn Rand calls the sanction of the victim, on the grand scale. And that is, the evil can't survive without the good agreeing to support them. They have no power to deal with reality. They can't create. The good have to agree to support them. Well, what if we withdraw our support? What if we withdraw our sanction? And we can see it in Atlas Shrugged, in the microcosm and the macrocosm. Microcosm, perfect example of this is Reardon with his family. And he supports them. They just abuse him and take advantage of him, and they vilify him, and they consort with his enemies, and they try to make it impossible for him and to bring him down. And finally, he withdraws his support, and God knows what happens to them. They might starve, but but there it is, in dealing with there, Ellen, and that's dealing with the moochers. But on the global scale, on the political scale, Galt's strike is a way to deal with the looters. Withdraw the moochers are parasitical with the consent of their victims, but the looters are criminals. They'll rob you. They use the power of the state to force you. And Galt pulls out. Galt gets these great giants to go on strike. In effect, they're withdrawing their sanction. They're withdrawing their support. They're going on strike. And so it would be fascinating, Shoshana, you're right. It would be fascinating to see this through Galt's eyes, how he figures this out. Because Ayn Rand telling it in the story of Galt figuring out would be the replicate of how Ayn Rand herself figured this out. So that would be absolutely fascinating. But it's a different story. And I agree with you, the mystery, something lost, something gained, but what's gained here is for the reader, it's a novel. This is not a work of philosophy. This is a novel. First, foremost, and always, this is a novel. It's a work of art. And the mystery gain just adds to the suspense of the story. So I think what's gained vastly outweighs what's lost. And besides, Ayn Rand, like we're doing now, Ayn Rand has given us enough information that we can figure out what it would look like through Galt's eyes. So yeah, that's the man who perceives reality. It's fascinating how he identified, not only for the first time, identifies the true nature of evil, but better yet, he identifies how to fight against it and how to gain victory over it.
And, even within, we haven't even talked about the speech, just saying, but even within the speech, he actually tells us something of how he figured it out. Then one day I heard these 3 parasites say that they owned my life, and I could put an end to this. I could stop it by pronouncing one word. I pronounced that word. That word was no. And so he actually has taken us to his thinking at that point, except I think that he decided what he was going to do, not just because of what he heard in the speech that day, although there's a sense in which when they called everybody together and said, you've signed up for this, you're giving your sanction, that was he wasn't just going to quit, like walk away, but he was going to say no. And if somebody says no, that means everybody else who's sitting there not saying no is saying yes, which they are. And then he writes the whole speech about saying no to everything. And the speech, I think, well, again, it's a long speech. And I guess if he's sitting there on the radio speaking, then maybe he's got it written down. He's got notes. When did he have time to write that speech? It took Ayn Rand 2 years to write that speech. I'm just saying, but took Ayn Rand 2 years to write that speech. And of course, she wrote that speech to be in a novel and not to be delivered in a broadcast. So it's not naturalistic, but nonetheless, it is not true that everything in that speech is in the novel beforehand. Things are connected, but we haven't heard the death premise hasn't been explicit in the way that it is in the speech. And, the context of philosophical history of religion, original sin, perception, all sorts of philosophical elements that are part of the speech are barely been mentioned and are at best implicit earlier in the novel. No, there are some sections that you can absolutely see. Here, I think of it as the bozo sections, descriptions of what the various bozo is the generic term for moochers and looters. What the bozos have been doing, and you have done this, you bozos, and you can, make little page numbers and connect up what he's accusing people of doing and what we have seen people do. But then there are sections in which he explains reality. And there are sections in which he explains what you can do, and including the fact that you need to think. You can think, every one of you.
Yeah,
you here alone with only my words to help you understand.
Yeah.
Well, it's the reader, of course, but that's how we all are. Just words to help us understand. So he's written it in a way for multiple audiences, and of course, it is a Declaration of Independence. Explaining why we're leaving. But it's more than that. I mean, the Declaration of Independence, that's quite striking. That's a fine document. But this has more to it because it's a more philosophical, fundamental
moral foundation.
It's a more fundamental revolution.
So you're right. It's a moral. Just a second, Ellen. It's a moral, philosophic Declaration of Independence by Galt, and also it's this fascinating combination of theoretical and applied philosophy. Because you're right, Shoshana, there's parts of it he's explaining reality, which is the job of philosophy. But there's in the areas that philosophy deals with. But it's also there's parts of it as what we need to do to fix this mess that the bad guys have created. And there's the application issues that quit, get away from them any way you can. Don't support their regime. Go on strike. There's the exhortations here of practical action to take in order to overcome the bad guys and then achieve flourishing human life. So it's a fascinating mixture of theoretical and applied philosophy. And of course, the applications follow logically from the theory that John Galt provides. You know, it's fascinating because he's Ayn Rand in this regard. He's created objectivism. He's identified the nature of evil, and he's identified critically the steps taken to defeat evil. You know, and for the good guys to emerge victorious.
Yeah, stop supporting your destroyers in just a
Right.
few words.
Right.
You know, stop.
Go ahead,
Go ahead.
Shoshana.
No, I really love that actually. Stop supporting your destroyers. If you
Right.
actually understand that, that covers a lot of ground.
Right.
You know,
So I went back and I read all my notes on Ankar's talk on Galt's speech, which I think is phenomenal. And he simplified it. He said part one is the morality of life. John Galt presents reason is man's tool of survival, reason is volitional, and I won't go through everything, but the primacy of existence. And then part two is the morality of death. So part one is A, part two is non-contradiction, that if you do contradict reality, you've got the morality of death. And he goes through the variations of the evil people and how I love this point he makes, that they deprive you, the goal of the moochers and looters are to deprive you of the concept of objective reality in order to rule you. And they try to make you fearful of your own mind. Then the third part, so you've got the part one is the morality of life, part two is the morality of death, and part three is just what you were saying, it's either or. Each one of us gets to choose. And he's got such, she, Ayn Rand, he, John Galt, has such warm invitations that,
mhm.
you fear rejecting my code because your self-esteem is tied to it. You have this, any causeless self-doubt that you have is due to the wrong moral code. And he said, reclaim your self-esteem and your mind. And so he's giving a just, rational statement to the better men and to the producers, for one. It's a major statement of justice, but also to the part of any one of us who wants to love our life. We're straddling the fence, and we don't have to straddle that fence of altruism, egoism, reason, faith. We can have reason and egoism and embrace our life without any of that. The term I learned from her and has saved my psychological life, unearned guilt. You can just dismiss that. And also there's one more point, and then I'll turn it to you, Shoshana. But he said, reclaim your self-esteem by reclaiming your mind. And Ankar talks about that whole phrase, who is John Galt, is really your own betrayed self-esteem. And I thought that was a really good point. When you say, what's the use? Why bother? Who cares? You've got this resignation premise going. That's what Galt doesn't have, but his name is being used as that premise. And the contradiction is that he is the one that is going to get us out of this mess with the wonderful, rational moral code. So Shoshana.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And I think that, there are all these dichotomies you don't have to accept, but the one that's real is life versus death, and you can't have both. And you're going to be in trouble if you try to have in between. I think that, there's that passage about the choice, that choice is yours to make. The dedication to one's highest potential, it's very positive, is made by accepting the fact that the noblest act you've ever performed is the act of your mind in the process of grasping that 2 and 2 make 4. Okay, the choice is still open to be a human being, to stand naked in the face of reality and reversing a costly historical error to declare I am, therefore I'll think. I mean, it's very inspiring. You can start now. This is the beginning of the rest of your life. You can make a right choice now. And that's what you can do. That's what you must do.
In a way, every one of Ayn Rand's readers is going on that same journey of the strike, of learning how evil altruism is, self-sacrifice is, destroying your mind, not embracing your mind and using it well. And they see the alternative. And so it's not just all the strikers who can walk out. It's all of us who are offered that wonderful moral code throughout the book. And we get it. Yeah, and like Dagny, it took her 12 years. Well, it took, how many years was it? 12 years for her? 12, 10 or 12 years. Well, for us, it's just reading the book.
Mhm.
Ayn Rand sped
Well,
that up.
some read the book and never get it, unfortunately.
Yeah,
But
unfortunate. Or they refuse to get it.
yeah,
I think that's it. I think it scares them because it goes counter to everything their self-esteem is tied to the wrong moral code of sacrifice, of duty, um
well, it goes against everything that most people have ever been taught, whether it's religion or collectivist, altruist collectivist ethics and politics. But I think that's what here's what a fascinating book for somebody to write. Um, not me because I have other books I want to write, but John Galt, the revolutionary,
yeah.
um, because he's a revolutionary in physics, in philosophy, and in politics. and I'm thinking while we were talking here, the followers of Marx, the Marxists, the communists, they claim to be revolutionary, and their intellectual and moral siblings, National Socialism, they claim to be revolutionary. But the truth is, there's little or nothing revolutionary about them. They're arrant altruists, which has been the dominant moral code for 2,000 years, going back at least as far as Jesus, maybe further. And they're just applying the Marxists and the Nazis. They're just applying altruism in different forms to politics. And collectivism is simply altruism applied to politics. Altruism is a broad moral code. Said you sacrifice to other people. It could be different forms, family, strangers, could be anybody. But collectivism is narrower political concept. It means in a distinctively political context, other people, that is the state, comes first. Well, the Marxists and the Nazis are just applying, the traditional moral code to politics. There's nothing revolutionary about this. But John Galt, even leaving aside the revolution in physics, his revolution in moral philosophy, that your life belongs to you and you do not and should not sacrifice for other people in the microcosm, whether it's your family or strangers or individuals, or the macrocosm, whether it's the state, but you should stand up and live your own life, achieving rational values
Without ever stepping on anyone else.
yeah, that's why I said to achieve rational values, that is not irrational ones, but yeah, you live your own life creatively, productively, by means of your own mental and bodily effort, and as a felicitous secondary consequence of you fulfilling yourself in that way, other people will in fact benefit. But anyhow, this is revolutionary. It's revolution in philosophy, and it in moral philosophy. And I think this is one reason of several why I think Ayn Rand is the greatest moral philosopher in history. But also, it forms the foundation then of the truly revolutionary political system of laissez-faire capitalism, of individualism, which has already been in existence sort of, with the American Revolution and the development of capitalism in Britain and in the United States, in the 19th century. But John Galt, that is Ayn Rand, the moral revolutionary, provides the foundation for this is the real revolution. We could point out to our enemies, the communists and Nazis and everything, that you're not revolutionaries. In your own terms, you're reactionaries. You're just applying the vicious moral code of the past 2,000 years. We're the revolution. And of course, John Galt knows that. He's revolutionary in every possible way, in the physical world and in the moral world. So that's another, there's a book there for somebody to write, John Galt, the revolutionary.
Yeah, well, I think that the essay that Nathaniel Brennan wrote for Who Was Ayn Rand, I think it's called The Moral Revolution of Atlas Shrugged. And that's what Ayn Rand used to state as part of what she's accomplishing in the book and the presentation of a new moral code.
Right.
And
but Galt's a revolutionary in physics too. And it's not my field, and all that goes way over my head. I just wonder, if it's theoretically possible, if it's possible to do in physics, in terms of large scale energy conversion, if it's metaphysically possible to do what John Galt did. I have no idea. I don't know the first thing about physics. But there's something that somebody wants to contribute to the book, John Galt, the revolutionary. We have a physicist write on that about whether that's possible. That would be interesting.
Yeah.
So,
We'll have the motor and we can certainly use it, right?
Yeah, the motor would help. The philosophy is even more life-giving, but the
Yes.
motor would be very life-giving too.
Well, I think that's one of the things that ties him to the much younger hero of Anthem, that he also is a scientific genius and he's a moral discoverer as well. And
Right.
those are the two things, he needs the light and he needs the word.
Yeah, there's another book for somebody to write, or an essay on the parallels and the
Well, they're both-
analog between
sure. Well,
equality and Galt.
Well, they're both Prometheus, right? And
Right, that's right.
right. And then Prometheus is mentioned in Rourke's speech too. So
There's that brilliant line of Francisco that Galt was Prometheus who withdrew his fire until the day when men withdraw their vultures. That is just perfect description of Galt's strike in terms of Greek mythology.
So one of the points in Galt's speech that I also like is to tell the better people, the men of the mind are not your destroyers. They're not your enemies. They're your benefactors. And she's got this laid out throughout the book. Just saying, when Hank and Dagny find the motor, he says to Dagny, there was the motor for your John Galt line. And then he said, Hank, do you know what that motor would have, Dagny says, Hank, do you know what that motor would have meant if built? And he chuckled briefly. I'd say about 10 years added to the life of every person in this country. If you consider how many things it would have made easier and cheaper to produce, how many hours of human labor it would have released for other things. And I'll go on, all hooked to an unlimited supply of energy with no fuel to pay for except for a few pennies worth to keep the converter going. That motor could have set the whole country in motion and on fire. It would have brought an electric light bulb into every home, even the homes of those people we saw down in the valley in Starnesville. It will. I'm going to find the man who made it. We'll try, he said. And then he says, there was the motor for your John Galt line. But just drawing the picture, just like they did earlier with Hank Rearden's metal, what Rearden's steel would do. Ayn Rand is telling us that these inventors who, Andy, you know so well, dear to your heart, to all of ours, but you certainly have been presenting them on your hero show, that they're your benefactors. These are not villains. These are not your enemies. And
they're not robber barons.
You damn well better appreciate them because your life depends on them and their moral code, the better ones of them. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, couple Galt's motor with Rearden metal, and Rearden's assessment is right. On average, God knows how many years that will add to the life of every person, because it will so lighten our labors and enable us to support ourselves working far fewer hours, leaving many more hours of leisure for whatever it is you want to do. So the quantity of life will be extended and the quality of life will be heightened. And Ayn Rand knew the history of capitalism. She knew the history of industrialization. And so she knew, for instance, when you combine Carnegie Steel with Rockefeller's production of oil, the ability to light your home with electricity, the ability to heat your homes with oil, the ability to things that people take for granted, to construct water mains and sewer mains that out of steel so they don't leak, and you could keep sewage and filth out of the drinking water, and thereby end in the industrialized countries cholera, dysentery, all these horrible diseases, and extend the human life expectancy by how many years. Ayn Rand knew all of this, and
vaccine for COVID.
Right. And Rearden, the innovations of Rearden and Galt simply take that to the next level of applied technology and industrialization to promote human life, dramatically.
Yeah. So I do want to add
don't forget Ellis Wyatt. I'm just saying, because
That's
Ellis
right.
Wyatt was
Yeah.
making the points you were making about time and your life, and yeah.
Right. And
Right.
Ellis Wyatt, like we discussed, he's the Rockefeller, of this universe, the guy who produced enormous quantities of petroleum products inexpensively, which enables people to heat their homes inexpensively, enabled Henry Ford, in real life to have, an inexpensive form of gasoline, so people could have cars rather than going around on horses or horse and buggies. How many lives did that save from pneumonia? If you have to go somewhere on a cold winter night, and you have a car that's enclosed with, with a heater rather than ride on your horse in the sleet, in the hail, in the snow, or in an open, horse and buggy. So, all the things that people don't think about or don't see, but Ayn Rand would see.
Granted,
She
it's
integrated it.
blackout. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I want to say also, not only does it add 10 years to your life with recognizing the men of the mind, but recognizing objectivism, the moral code of loving your life, of knowing how to love it with the virtues and values. You can see the change in her characters. We all love the change process, to see things improving. And you see it with Midas Mulligan when he goes out after he discovers why he needs to go on strike, and he's learning this new moral code, and he buys the first bluebells of the year and is tossing them about. Or Daniger, Ken Daniger, wants to go on a boat ride with Dagny and take time to be with friends. And Quentin Daniel wants to earn $1 million, and he's so excited to be a janitor, but that's not where he's going to stay, a janitor in the in the power, working for John Galt.
Right. And they're going to the concerts, they're going to the theater. Just saying.
Right. You get the enormous joy of life, the joie de vivre, from recognizing a rational moral code. You get rid of all of that clutter, the contradictions in your own mind, the cobwebs, the things that keep you up nights. And that's the gift that Ayn Rand has given us, that ability to have clarity, moral clarity, and moral based on a rational moral code. So Shoshana, know if you want.
I think that one of the things that we're doing in talking about Galt's view of the world and what Galt accomplishes is that we are in a way escaping from a dominant emotion through much of the book of things not going well at all. I'm just saying,
Yes.
because essentially, if you put it together, the first two parts of the novel are about a world that has to be left behind, that's corrupt at its core. And that's, in some ways, that's a scary idea. How could it be that bad? Well, you better know it's that bad because it's hurting you, and not knowing it is hurting you worse. So you need to see it, you need to see the truth, and then you need to act accordingly. Now, of course, in our own life, we aren't necessarily living in parts 1 and 2 of Atlas Shrugged. But what part 3 of Atlas Shrugged does for us, including those 2 chapters, the utopia of the beauty of it, and the utopia of greed, and the very end and the epilogue, well, they are still there, but they're going to now reclaim the world. We've got the promise of a different direction, which means that you could say, as we started today, we do have to take it seriously in the sense of knowing what's wrong with parts 1 and 2, but ultimately, it doesn't have to be, it's not the whole novel. And I think that's really interesting, because when you start just the experience reading the book, naively, when you're reading about the effort to build the John Galt line, and you don't, first time readers might not know what they're getting into, that could be someone else's novel. That would be a Merwin Webster kind of novel, right? Like Cal McKay, just get it done and
Well, like
fight this and fight that.
Yeah, right. Like
So,
Spearman, like Frank
Andy,
Spearman.
any final words?
I just want, I know Shoshana, you're familiar with Frank Spearman. We've discussed that before, these real can-do books, about the railroad. There's, remember what Ken Daniger says to Dagny in the valley about, if you met these great men in, in heaven, and what would you want? You say, and you just want to, thank you, and something more you'd want to hear from them. Well done, Dagny. Well done. And I think in a certain way, what Ayn Rand has provided for these great creators of history in every field, the great minds that have carried us forward and have often been tortured, as Howard Roark points out in his courtroom speech in The Fountainhead. She a heartfelt thank you Ayn Rand provided to these great minds, and also a sanction, a justification of their moral rectitude, that you are right and you were right and you've always been right and you always will be right, and your enemies are the ones who are morally wrong, profoundly, egregiously wrong. And so I think, the series that we've been doing on Atlas Shrugged in a way is we're paying tribute, the way Ayn Rand paid tribute to these great creators, we're paying tribute to her. Now we don't have to provide a moral sanction for her, because she's shown the moral sanction. She's the one who first understood it, but before anybody else. But we can pay tribute to her enormous achievement here and say, thank you, Ayn Rand, for writing the greatest novel in world literature, this extraordinary story that just keeps us mesmerized, which is reading it as it ends in itself requires no other justification beyond the intellectual, emotional experience we have of being in the universe of Atlas Shrugged, when we read it and when we ponder it and discuss it. And then on top of that, as if that isn't enough, she integrated this rational, life-giving philosophy into this extraordinary story, giving us all of that. When the book came out, it was sold for like 95 cents, which was, granted, that was worth more in 1957 than it is today, but even still, for $10, for $10 you get the greatest story ever written and the rational, life-giving philosophy. Well, thank you, Ayn Rand, for, and to the virtues of American capitalism and the publishing industry that make the mass production possible. But thank you to Ayn Rand for providing more value. Let's put it this way. You could make a case that Ayn Rand has provided more value to her brothers and sisters than any other human being in history, all as a secondary consequence of fulfilling herself, as a novelist, who then needed to study philosophy in order to create the ideal man. She fulfilled herself. So you're very happy that Ayn Rand was able to do that. And as a felicitous secondary consequence, she gave us more value than probably anybody in history, except maybe Aristotle. So I just want to thank you, Ayn Rand. And this series is a way of paying tribute to her, the way she pays tribute to the other great creators in the book itself.
I think that's true. And it's wonderful to pay tribute to her. And it is a gift, because it's not, even though, Richard Halley talks about there being a trade and that people who understand him pay him and so on. But, especially since Ayn Rand is no longer with us, it's difficult to imagine trading, giving her something that would be in thanks for what she's given us. But the other way that I think about it sometimes, because, I teach literature, is that this is the kind of gift that you have to give to in order to take it, because the book doesn't read itself, and only when you read it with your full awareness and your full mind and putting things together and thinking about it and asking questions and being active, well, that's the way to get the full gift. That's the way to get all the juice out of it. And that's one reason why I think we've all read this book many times, and our disclaimer guy told you that you shouldn't be listening to us unless you've read the book at least once, but read it again. Read it again. Ask more questions. Ask us questions. There's every time I read it, I notice something that I didn't notice before, because although in a sense I think, well, implicitly I knew that it's not hidden, but it's also, well, the closer you get, the better it looks, or the closer you look, the better it gets. It is a book that rewards that kind of attention. And what's better than that?
And Razi has certainly given us that experience, because we've looked at each character, the psychology of each character through it. So I thank you, Razi, for that experience. I want to end with one scene that I think is just very tender. And that is in the Valley, with Dr. Axton talking about John Galt and his children, his 3 children. He said, let's see. I thought that in the name of any greatness that had ever existed and moved the world, the greatness of which they were the last descendants, they would win. I remember one night when I noticed that John, they used to go to Dr. Axton's house, Hugh Axton's house as students and just talk until the wee hours of the morning. So it just, and so he's saying, I remember one night when I noticed that John had been silent for a long time, and I saw that he had fallen asleep, stretched there on the ground. The other two confessed that he had not slept for 3 days. I sent the two of them home at once, but I didn't have the heart to disturb him. It was a warm spring night. I brought a blanket to cover him, and I let him sleep where he was. I sat there beside him till morning, and as I watched his face in the starlight, then the first ray of sun on his untroubled forehead and closed lids, what I experienced was not a prayer, I do not pray, but that state of spirit at which a prayer is a misguided attempt, a full, confident, affirming self-dedication to my love of the right, to the certainty that the right would win, and that this boy would have the kind of future he deserved. He moved his arm, pointing to the valley. I did not expect it to be as great as this or as hard. And I think that the tenderness that you see, not just there with Dr. Axton, but throughout the book, with between the good people, is lovely. Another gift that Ayn Rand has given us.
And since you've mentioned Axton, who's very smart, and he's
Yeah.
also another form of Ayn Rand because he's the philosopher, but he's also the one who knows about Galt and Dagny
Yeah,
first
yeah.
without
He,
being told. Just saying, he's got pretty good eyes too.
father, right?
So Galt's
He's
yes.
looking
Yeah.
at his future daughter-in-law.
That's
Yeah.
right. And
Yes.
what's striking about that scene, Ellen, and so many others, is the goodwill that Ayn
Oh,
Rand shows us. Yeah, there's some people read Ayn Rand's novels and they think she's cold or hard or heartless, and everything. And that's 108. That assessment is 180 degrees polar opposite to the truth. The enormous benevolence and goodwill you see in Ayn Rand's novels. You see it with Rourke, with Mallory, Dagny, with Cheryl. You see Dr. Axton with his son here. It just permeates the novels. You just, if you're
Reardon and the wet nurse.
yeah, that's right. So
Wet
many.
nurse.
Yeah, there's so many instances of it that if you're reading in full focus and if you're honest about it, you can't miss the extraordinary goodwill and benevolence, which is the logical application of Ayn Rand's philosophy.
right. And that's one of the things I love about, I mean, I love the philosophy. It's dramatically changed my life, and I'm sure yours. I don't know where mine would have been without it, but just the benevolence of it, that you find
Right.
the good in people and you find the good people and you invite them into your life and you know how to protect yourself from the badly mixed
Right.
people,
And
and
because of that, you do not sanction evil.
you don't sanction
Yeah,
evil.
yeah. If people have free will, if they change, that's great. But as long as they continue in
Change in the
evil,
right direction.
yeah, if
But
you
they
change in
go
the
in
right
the wrong
direction,
direction, like Stadler too.
yeah, you
And you,
change in the right direction, like the wet nurse did. Then you protect them, you love them, you support them.
help,
But as long
yeah.
as they continue in evil, that means they're transgressing against the good. It means they're harming the good, and you do not sanction that. You fight
And
it.
that's for yourself too, Andy, that you want to we all want to make sure we're on that upward trajectory. And when we make each and every choice, it's, are we doing this in full focus or the fullest focus we know of? Are we good to ourselves if we make a misstep, an error of knowledge, and correct it? And it's just so powerful to
Mhm.
moral certainty. And I think that's what she's given us. And the more, and I've read that novel umpteen times. And if I could, and each time I get something different from it. Each time I would write a course, when I would give courses at the Objectivist conferences, I would reread the novel with a different theme in mind, with whatever the theme of my course was. So I I know that we need to wrap up. Any final words? Final words, I should say. We
Again,
get
I
to,
just want to say thank you to Ayn Rand for
and yeah,
for saving my life and for giving us the possibility of, saving the world from the bad guys. It wouldn't be possible without Ayn Rand. Not nowadays.
And I would say for saving my life and for my kids' life too, because I brought them up using the wonderful rational ideas. Just, I had so much fun raising them. And they now have good heads on their shoulders. And so I love that about it. Shoshana, you know.
Well, it's hard to be anything but benevolent when thinking about Ayn Rand's achievement here, which is not to denigrate her other novels and her other writing, all of which is worth reading. I mean, I think that when she wrote this book, she thought, what can I possibly do to top this in fiction? This is the best. Well, I think that Ayn Rand could have done something to equal it. Just, not doing Atlas Shrugged again, but I think that she had the power within her. If she had wanted to, she could have done that. But instead of regretting that she didn't do another novel after Atlas Shrugged, I am very grateful that we have, all of this one and all the years that we can have to get as much as we can out of it. And yes, my children are Atlas Shrugged readers as well. And
it changes people's lives, even if they don't realize it. If you read it, it can change. You have the opportunity to change for the better. But I think I've mentioned this before. I had clients that read Atlas Shrugged and they would start doing much better. And they may not have consciously known exactly what premises they picked up from it. I'd help them along, but she's just, the change process is wonderful, dramatic, psychological change process, and to improvement, obviously. And the world is open to you if you want to study Ayn Rand and objectivism and enjoy Atlas Shrugged again. So with that, we will wrap it up. I want to thank you so much, Dr. Shoshana Milgram and Dr. Andrew Bernstein. I'm Dr. Ellen Kenner.
thank you.
To thank Razi
Thank Razi, and above all, I want to thank Ayn Rand.
and thank Ayn
Thank
Rand.
Ayn Rand.